The crisp morning air was filled with the scent of pine and the distant murmur of a stream. The sun had just begun its ascent, casting a golden hue over the sprawling landscapes of Yellowstone National Park. As I steered our SUV along the winding road, I glanced at Catherine, sitting beside me in the passenger seat. Her eyes were fixed on the breathtaking scenery, but there was a noticeable distance between us, a chasm that seemed to widen with each passing day. "Looks like we picked the perfect time to visit," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "The weather's great, and the park is less crowded this time of year." Catherine managed a half-hearted smile. "Yes, it's beautiful," she replied, though her tone lacked the warmth I had hoped for. We had planned this trip as a last-ditch effort to reconnect. Our 12-year marriage was fraying at the edges, and I thought a getaway in nature might help us rekindle the spark we once had. But from the moment we arrived, something felt off. As we checked into our cabin, the park ranger who handed us the keys mentioned that we'd be having a guide to help us navigate the trails and make the most of our visit. "Josh will be meeting you shortly," the ranger said. "He's one of our best. You'll love him." I nodded, though I was preoccupied with my thoughts. Catherine was already unloading our bags, her movements absent of the usual enthusiasm. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, but I brushed it aside. We had this vacation to look forward to, and I was determined to make it work. The moment Josh arrived, he made quite an impression. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a confident stride and a warm smile that seemed to instantly brighten Catherine's mood. He had a rugged charm about him, his tousled hair, sun-kissed skin, and an easy demeanor made him seem like he belonged in this wilderness. "Welcome to Yellowstone," Josh greeted us, extending his hand. "I'm Josh, your guide for the week. I hear you're looking to explore the best of what the park has to offer." "Nice to meet you, Josh," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "We're really looking forward to it." Josh's eyes shifted to Catherine, who was now standing beside me. "And you must be Catherine. I've heard you're quite the nature enthusiast." Catherine's eyes lit up. "Yes, I love being outdoors. I'm really excited about this trip." "Great," Josh said, his enthusiasm infectious. "I planned some amazing trails for us. We'll start with a scenic hike tomorrow. It's a perfect way to ease into everything." As we chatted, I noticed the way Josh's attention seemed to be focused on Catherine. He made her laugh with ease, his jokes and stories about the park's history engaging her in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I forced myself to push aside the gnawing feeling of jealousy and uncertainty that began to creep in. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect day for our planned adventures. Josh met us at the cabin with a cheerful good morning, and a backpack full of supplies. "Ready for a day of exploration?" he asked, his enthusiasm evident. "I sure am," Catherine replied, her excitement palpable. I had planned to spend the day fishing at a nearby lake, a solitary activity that I'd hoped would give Catherine and Josh time to bond. The idea was to give Catherine a break from our routine and allow her to connect with nature. "Are you sure you don't want to join us?" Josh asked, looking at me with genuine interest. "I'm good, thanks," I replied. "Fishing's my thing. You two enjoy the hike." "Will do," Josh said with a nod. "We'll meet up later in the afternoon. Catherine, I've planned a special trail for us. It's a bit off the beaten path, but it's worth it for the views." Catherine's eyes sparkled. "That sounds wonderful. I've always wanted to see more of the park's hidden spots." As they set off, I watched them disappear into the distance. There was something about the way Josh looked back at Catherine that made me uneasy, but I tried to focus on the tranquility of the lake. Casting my line into the water, I attempted to clear my mind and enjoy the solitude. The hours drifted by, the rhythmic cast and reel of my fishing line becoming a calming routine. But every so often, my mind wandered back to Catherine and Josh. I couldn't shake the feeling that their connection was more than just a friendly guide-guest relationship. Around midday, I decided to take a break and grab a bite to eat. As I sat on a rock by the lake, I overheard a couple of hikers discussing their experience with Josh. They spoke highly of him, mentioning his charm and how he seemed to have a special knack for making people feel at ease. It was then that I realized I had been holding onto a growing suspicion. Deciding to check on Catherine and Josh, I packed up my gear and headed towards the trailhead where they had set off. My intention was to surprise them and make sure everything was going as planned. As I approached the trail, my heart began to race with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Little did I know, the trail would lead to revelations that would change everything. By the third day of our trip, the air in Yellowstone seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension. Catherine and I had managed to avoid any serious discussions about our relationship, but I could feel the distance between us growing. Meanwhile, Josh seemed to have slipped effortlessly into our dynamic, his charm and easygoing nature making him an instant favorite of Catherine's. That morning, Catherine and Josh set out for another hike while I once again prepared for a day of fishing. As they left, Catherine's laughter echoed through the cabin. Josh's voice followed, teasing her about her lack of hiking experience. "You know, Catherine, if you keep laughing like that, we might just scare away all the wildlife," Josh joked. "I'll try to keep it down," Catherine replied, her voice light and cheerful. "But I make no promises. It's hard not to laugh when you're so funny." Their easy banter made me feel like an outsider, a feeling that gnawed at me as I headed to the lake. The day passed with little excitement, the fish remaining indifferent to my bait. I found myself constantly checking my watch, eager for the moment when Catherine and Josh would return. When they finally did, I was struck by how radiant Catherine looked. Her cheeks were flushed from the exertion of the hike, and her eyes sparkled with a newfound energy. Josh, too, seemed invigorated, his smile wide and his movements lively. "How was the hike?" I asked, trying to mask my growing unease. "It was incredible," Catherine said, her enthusiasm unmistakable. "Josh showed me a hidden waterfall. It was breathtaking." "That sounds great," I said, forcing a smile. "I hope you enjoyed the trail." "It was more than I could have hoped for," Catherine replied. Her eyes met Josh's for a moment, and they shared a look that made my heart sink. That night, as we sat around the campfire, Catherine and Josh shared stories about their day. Josh's tales of wildlife encounters and hiking adventures were filled with passion, and Catherine listened with rapt attention. The connection between them was palpable, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for me to ignore. At one point, Catherine leaned closer to Josh, her fingers brushing his as she reached for a marshmallow. The innocent gesture felt charged with a deeper significance, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. "You know, Josh," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "you've really made this trip special for us. We appreciate everything you've done." "Happy to help," Josh replied, his smile never faltering. "It's been great showing you around." As the night grew darker and the campfire's glow began to fade, I found myself consumed by a mix of frustration and worry. The lines between friendship and something more were blurring, and I was left questioning the nature of Catherine's feelings for Josh. The following day, I decided to take a break from fishing and explore a nearby trail. I needed to clear my mind and perhaps find some clarity about what was happening between Catherine and Josh. As I hiked, my thoughts raced, and I kept returning to the same unsettling question: was there something more going on between them? By mid-afternoon, I reached a viewpoint that overlooked a secluded area of the park. From there, I could see the winding trail below, where Catherine and Josh had ventured earlier in the day. I decided to wait and see if they would pass by. My curiosity was driving me to find out if there was anything more to their relationship. As I waited, I noticed movement on the trail below. I squinted and saw Catherine and Josh approaching, their figures growing larger as they neared the viewpoint. My heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread. When they finally reached the secluded clearing, I could see them clearly. They were sitting on a large rock, their bodies angled towards each other. Josh was speaking animatedly, his hands gesturing as he talked, while Catherine listened intently. Then, to my shock, Josh placed a hand on Catherine's knee. Catherine didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in closer, her eyes locked on his. It was an intimate gesture that spoke volumes. I could feel the ground beneath me shift as my heart sank. I remained hidden, watching as Josh gently brushed a strand of hair from Catherine's face. They shared a tender smile, and Catherine's hand found its way to Josh's, their fingers intertwining. It was clear that their connection had moved beyond mere friendship. My mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions. I felt betrayed, angry, and profoundly hurt. The image of them together, so close and affectionate, was seared into my memory. I knew I had to confront the situation, but I wasn't sure how. The evening brought a heavy atmosphere back to the cabin. Catherine and Josh arrived with the same cheerful demeanor as before, but I was unable to share in their excitement. The sight of them together in the clearing had left me deeply unsettled. "Hey, how was the hike?" I asked, my voice strained as I tried to sound casual. It was amazing, Catherine said, her face glowing. Josh showed me some incredible spots. We even had a little picnic by the stream. That sounds great, I replied. Did you have a good time? Josh looked at me with a smile that seemed a bit too confident. Yeah, it was a great day. We really got to see the park in a new light. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, I was seething. I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. As the night wore on and we gathered around the dinner table, I decided to confront Catherine about what I had seen. Catherine, I began, trying to keep my voice steady, I need to talk to you about something. Her eyes widened slightly, and she looked at me with concern. What's wrong? I saw you and Josh earlier today, I said, my voice tinged with hurt. I saw the way you two were together. It looked intimate. Catherine's face flushed with surprise and embarrassment. Michael, don't try to deny it, I interrupted, feeling a surge of anger. I saw everything. I don't understand what's going on between you two, but it's clear there's something more than just friendship. Josh shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence replaced by a more subdued demeanor. Michael, I can explain. No, I cut him off. I don't want to hear excuses. I need to know where we stand. I need to know if this is how it's going to be from now on. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Catherine looked down at her lap, her expression a mix of guilt and sadness. Michael, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. It just happened. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had hoped for some explanation, some reassurance, but all I felt was a deep, aching sense of betrayal. I don't know how to move forward from this, I said quietly. But I need some time to think. As I left the cabin and stepped into the cold night air, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The trust between us had been shattered, and the path ahead was uncertain. The days that followed were marked by a palpable tension. I found it hard to interact with Catherine and Josh without feeling the weight of what I had seen and heard. Despite my efforts to avoid conflict, the air around us crackled with unresolved issues. On the 5th day of our trip, Catherine and Josh decided to go on a longer hike, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had taken to wandering the park, trying to clear my mind and find some semblance of peace. The vast landscapes of Yellowstone, once a symbol of hope and renewal, now seemed empty and cold. As I walked, I replayed the conversation from the other night over and over. Catherine's apology felt inadequate, and Josh's attempts to explain seemed hollow. I struggled to understand why this had happened and what it meant for our future. Back at the cabin, Catherine was unusually distant. She avoided eye contact and seemed lost in her own world. Josh, too, appeared awkward, often choosing to stay silent rather than risk further tension. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I decided to broach the subject again. The silence between us was suffocating, and I needed to address the elephant in the room. Catherine, I began, trying to keep my tone calm, I think we need to talk about what's going on. This can't just be ignored. Catherine's fork paused midair, and she looked at me with a mixture of fear and resignation. Michael, I know this is hard. I don't know how to fix things, but I want to try. Josh, who had been quietly eating, set down his fork and spoke up. Michael, I understand you're hurt. I just want you to know that this wasn't planned. It happened, and I regret that it caused you pain. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what to say. The words felt like empty platitudes in the face of the betrayal I felt. I appreciate that you're both willing to talk, but right now, I need some space. I need to figure out what I want and how to move forward. Catherine looked like she wanted to say more, but instead, she nodded silently. The rest of the meal was eaten in strained silence, the once comforting atmosphere of the cabin now feeling like a prison. The following days were a blur of cold interactions and forced civility. I spent more time alone, taking long walks and exploring the park's less traveled paths. The solitude gave me time to think, and as I did, I began to feel a simmering anger that I hadn't fully acknowledged before. One evening, after Catherine and Josh had retired to their rooms, I sat alone on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. The anger I felt was no longer just about the betrayal, it was also about the helplessness and humiliation of being left out of something so intimate. As the night grew darker, I began to formulate a plan. If Catherine and Josh were to continue their affair, I would make sure that it wouldn't be as easy as they hoped. The idea of revenge began to take shape in my mind, a way to regain some control over a situation that had left me feeling powerless. My first step was to find ways to subtly undermine their relationship. I started by paying closer attention to their interactions, noting their routines and preferences. I found out about the personal items Catherine and Josh had shared, such as their favorite spots in the park and their inside jokes. One night, I overheard Catherine and Josh talking about a private spot in the park where they had planned to spend time together. I made a mental note of it and began to think of ways to disrupt their plans. The next day, I decided to act on my growing sense of revenge. I made some changes to their itinerary, planning activities that would force Catherine and Josh to interact with others and take them out of their private bubble. I scheduled group tours and added more public activities to our plans. The changes to our itinerary had an immediate effect. Catherine and Josh, who had been used to spending their time in secluded spots, were now thrust into more public settings. The group tours and crowded trails created a stark contrast to the intimacy they had been enjoying. During one of the group hikes, I noticed that Catherine and Josh were less at ease. Their conversations were strained, and their attempts to find privacy were increasingly thwarted by the presence of other tourists. I watched with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow as their connection began to fray. One afternoon, as we were on a guided tour of a geothermal area, Catherine tried to talk to Josh in hushed tones. "This isn't what I had in mind," she said, her voice barely audible over the guide's explanations. "I miss the quiet spots we used to visit." "I know," Josh replied, looking around nervously. "But we had to deal with this for now. It's not easy, but we'll find a way." Their exchange was punctuated by the guide's enthusiastic commentary, leaving me to wonder if their relationship would survive the pressure of the more public setting I had engineered. That evening, as we gathered around the campfire, Catherine and Josh's discomfort was evident. Catherine tried to keep up a brave front, but I could see the strain in her eyes. Josh, too, seemed to be struggling with the situation. I decided to press the issue further, engaging Catherine in a conversation about our disrupted plans. "Catherine," I said, "I've noticed you and Josh have been having a hard time with the new itinerary. Is everything okay?" Catherine looked at me with a mixture of frustration and exhaustion. "Michael, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, but this isn't helping. It's only making things worse." Josh, who had been sitting silently, spoke up. "Michael, we understand that you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle it. We need to find a better way to address our issues." Their words were like a knife twisting in my chest. The realization that my plan to make their lives difficult was only causing more pain hit me hard. I had hoped that my actions would bring some measure of satisfaction, but instead, I was left feeling more lost and conflicted than ever. As the flames of the campfire flickered, casting long shadows across our faces, I wondered if my quest for revenge had only served to deepen the rift between us all. The path forward seemed uncertain, and I was left grappling with the consequences of my decisions. The days continued to drag on, each one filled with strained conversations and awkward silences. The public activities I had arranged seemed to have taken their toll on Catherine and Josh, and the cracks in their relationship were becoming more apparent. My actions, intended to bring them discomfort, had instead highlighted the deepening rift between us. One evening, after another tense dinner, Catherine and Josh retreated to their rooms, leaving me alone once again. I sat on the porch, staring into the darkness and contemplating my next move. The anger and pain that had fueled my quest for revenge were beginning to shift to a deep sense of despair. The satisfaction I had hoped to find was elusive, replaced by an overwhelming sense of futility. As I sat there, I heard the faint sound of laughter coming from the direction of the cabin's small balcony. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly approached the source of the noise. Peering around the corner, I saw Catherine and Josh sitting close together, their heads bent in conversation. Their proximity and the intimate way they spoke to each other made my heart ache. "Michael's really making this hard for us," Catherine said softly, her voice tinged with frustration. "I know," Josh replied. "But we've managed to make the best of it. It's not easy, but we have to keep going." Catherine sighed. "I just wish things were different. I never wanted any of this to get so complicated." Josh reached out and placed his hand on Catherine's knee, a gesture that seemed both comforting and intimate. "We'll figure it out. We just need to be patient." The sight of them together in such an intimate setting made something inside me snap. I couldn't take it any longer. I stepped out of the shadows and cleared my throat, causing them both to jump. "Michael," Catherine said, her voice suddenly tense. "What are you doing out here?" "I couldn't sleep," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I needed some fresh air." Josh's expression hardened slightly. "Is there something you need to talk about?" "I think it's time we had a serious conversation," I said, my voice cold. "I can't keep pretending that everything is normal." Catherine's face turned pale, and Josh looked between us with a mixture of apprehension and guilt. "Michael, what do you want to say?" "I want to understand what's really going on here," I said, taking a deep breath. "I need to know if there's something more between you two. I saw how close you were, and I need the truth." Catherine looked down, her eyes brimming with tears. "Michael, I don't know how to explain. It just happened. I never meant for it to get this far." Josh's face flushed with shame. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. It was never supposed to be like this." The conversation was heavy and painful, each word dragging us further into a painful reality. The truth that emerged was a mixture of regret, confusion, and unresolved emotions. The damage had been done, and no amount of explanation could undo it. The next morning, the atmosphere in the cabin was thick with the remnants of last night's confrontation. Catherine and Josh seemed distant, their earlier attempts at normalcy failing miserably. I, too, was grappling with my own emotions, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. As we gathered for breakfast, Catherine's silence was palpable. She poked at her food, her gaze fixed on the table, while Josh's attempts at small talk fell flat. The tension was so thick that it felt almost suffocating. After breakfast, Catherine asked to speak with me privately. We walked to a nearby overlook, away from the prying eyes of Josh and the others. The silence between us was heavy, and I could feel the weight of the words that were about to be spoken. "Michael," Catherine began, her voice trembling, "I owe you an explanation. I've been avoiding it because I didn't know how to put it into words." I looked at her, trying to maintain a facade of calm. "I'm listening. I never intended for any of this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "Josh and I became close during the trip. It wasn't planned, it just happened. I felt a connection that I haven't felt in a long time, but I didn't mean for it to turn into this." Her admission was painful to hear, and I struggled to process the emotions swirling inside me. "So, what does this mean for us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Catherine's eyes were filled with tears. "I don't know. I never wanted to hurt you, Michael. I've been trying to figure out what I want and how to fix this, but I'm lost." The raw honesty of her confession hit me hard. The reality of the situation was more painful than I had imagined. The betrayal was not just an act, it was a deep and personal failure of trust. "Do you still have feelings for him?" I asked, my voice trembling. Catherine hesitated before nodding. "I do, but I also know that what we had was special. I don't want to lose you." The depth of her confession left me feeling hollow. The trust that had been broken seemed irreparable, and the future of our relationship was uncertain. The days that followed were a blur of conflicted emotions and unresolved tension. Catherine's confession had left me reeling, and the anger I felt was now compounded by a deep sense of betrayal and helplessness. As I struggled to come to terms with everything, the idea of revenge began to take on a new, more defined shape in my mind. I wanted to make sure that Catherine and Josh would face the consequences of their actions. The satisfaction I had sought initially was now replaced by a more calculated desire for retribution. One night, while Catherine and Josh were out for a walk, I decided to put my plan into action. I rummaged through the cabin's drawers and found a small collection of tools and supplies. With a grim determination, I set about preparing a series of pranks designed to disrupt their plans and create discomfort. I started by targeting their favorite secluded spots in the park. I took some of Catherine's personal items, things she had left behind in our cabin, and strategically placed them in areas where Josh and Catherine had spent time together. I wanted to create a sense of unease and invasion. Next, I hacked into Josh's phone, which he had accidentally left behind during one of our outings. I accessed his contact list and sent a series of anonymous messages to his friends, hinting at the affair and creating a buzz that would undoubtedly reach Catherine. It was a petty move, but it was meant to stir trouble and force them to confront their actions publicly. The final step of my plan was to create a dramatic scene. I knew that Catherine and Josh had planned to have a private dinner at a local restaurant. I decided to show up unannounced, hoping to make a scene that would force them to face the consequences of their actions in front of others. As I prepared for the evening, I felt a mix of satisfaction and dread. The path I had chosen was one of destruction and pain. But it seemed like the only way to reclaim some control over the shattered pieces of my life. The following night promised to be the culmination of my revenge, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The evening arrived with an uneasy calm. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would make an impression but not draw too much attention. My plan was to make a dramatic impact without becoming the center of unwelcome attention. Catherine and Josh had arranged a private dinner at a well-known local restaurant, and I intended to disrupt it in the most effective way possible. I arrived at the restaurant early and took a seat at a table positioned strategically near the couple's reserved area. I could see Catherine and Josh's table from where I sat, and I waited with a growing sense of anticipation. The restaurant was elegantly decorated, its soft lighting and serene atmosphere creating a stark contrast to the storm I planned to unleash. As the time approached for Catherine and Josh to arrive, I saw them enter the restaurant. Catherine looked stunning in a simple yet elegant dress, her hair styled in loose waves. Josh, in his best suit, looked equally poised. They were clearly expecting a romantic evening, and the sight of them together only fueled my resolve. I waited until they were seated and had ordered their drinks before making my move. I approached their table with deliberate steps, my heart pounding. Catherine looked up, her eyes widening with shock as she recognized me. "Michael, what are you doing here?" Catherine's voice was laced with confusion and embarrassment. "I thought I'd join you for dinner," I said, trying to keep my tone as calm as possible while letting a hint of coldness seep through. "I see you're having a nice evening." Josh's face turned pale as he realized who I was. "Michael, this isn't what it looks like. We were just trying to have a private dinner." I cut him off, my voice rising slightly. "A private dinner? You mean the kind where you can carry on your affair away from prying eyes? How convenient." The restaurant's atmosphere shifted as other diners began to notice the commotion. Conversations paused, and eyes turned toward our table. Catherine's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "Michael, please," Catherine said, her voice pleading. "This isn't the place for this. We need to talk about this calmly." "I don't see the need for calmness at the moment," I said. "I think everyone here deserves to know what's really going on." With that, I pulled out my phone and began showing the anonymous messages I had sent to Josh's friends. The messages hinted at the affair and suggested that there were more details to come. The reactions from those who had received the messages were mixed, ranging from shock to curiosity. "Michael, this is insane," Josh said, his voice rising in frustration. "You're making a scene. This isn't going to fix anything." "No," I said, "but it will make sure that everyone here knows what kind of person you really are." The confrontation drew more attention, and a few patrons began to murmur amongst themselves. Catherine's eyes were filled with tears, and Josh's attempts to salvage the situation were becoming increasingly desperate. As I prepared to leave, I glanced at Catherine one last time. "Enjoy your evening. I hope it was worth it." I walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a scene of chaos and heartbreak. The satisfaction of having exposed their affair was fleeting, overshadowed by the emotional turmoil that had consumed me. The aftermath of the restaurant scene was swift and painful. The following day, the tension between Catherine and Josh reached a breaking point. The restaurant incident had not only publicly exposed their affair but had also turned our vacation into a battleground of emotions. Catherine and Josh avoided me as much as possible, their attempts to maintain normalcy now overshadowed by the fallout. Catherine's face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. Josh seemed more withdrawn, his earlier bravado replaced by a sullen demeanor. We spent the morning in strained silence. Catherine attempted to make small talk, but her efforts felt hollow and forced. I could sense her frustration and regret, but there was also a tangible wall of distance that had grown between us. Later in the day, Catherine requested another private conversation. This time, she wanted to meet at the cabin's porch. I agreed, though I was apprehensive about what was to come. As we sat on the porch, Catherine spoke first, her voice trembling. "Michael, I'm so sorry for what happened. The dinner was a disaster. And I know I've hurt you deeply. I understand if you're angry." "I am angry," I said, my voice steady but filled with hurt. "But I'm also confused. I don't know where we go from here." Catherine took a deep breath, her eyes searching mine for some sign of understanding. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've been through. I know I made a terrible mistake, and I want to make things right. But I also understand if you can't forgive me." Josh, who had been standing nearby, finally spoke up. Michael, I want to apologize as well. I never intended for this to get so out of hand. I regret everything that happened and the pain it caused. His words felt insincere, a last-ditch attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of our relationships. Regret doesn't change what's happened, I said. The trust is broken, and the damage is done. The conversation was heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Catherine's attempts to bridge the gap between us were met with my coldness. And Josh's presence only served as a reminder of the betrayal. As the day wore on, it became clear that our vacation was beyond repair. The sense of normalcy we had once hoped for was gone, replaced by a profound sense of loss and disillusionment. As we prepared to leave Yellowstone, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had settled over me. The trip that was meant to rekindle our relationship had instead become a catalyst for its unraveling. The road ahead was uncertain, and I was left grappling with the painful reality of what had transpired. The drive back from Yellowstone was filled with a somber silence. Catherine, Josh, and I were all wrapped in our own thoughts, the air thick with unspoken words. The scenic beauty that had once seemed so promising now felt like a cruel reminder of what we had lost. Catherine sat in the front seat, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape. Her silence was a painful contrast to the lively conversations we used to have. Josh, sitting in the back, seemed to shrink into his seat, his presence almost invisible as he stared out of the window. As we approached the outskirts of town, I felt a heavy weight on my chest. The emotional turmoil of the past days had left me drained, and the anger that had fueled my actions was now giving way to a deep sadness. The confrontation at the restaurant, the failed attempts at reconciliation, and the constant reminders of the betrayal had taken their toll. I decided it was time to address the reality of our situation. The cabin was now just a memory, and the vacation that was meant to heal our relationship had become a symbol of its end. "Can we talk?" I asked, breaking the silence. My voice was quiet but firm. Catherine turned to look at me, her face showing a mix of anxiety and hope. "Sure, Michael, what's on your mind? We need to figure out where we go from here," I said. The trip was supposed to bring us closer, but it's done the opposite. I think we need to face the fact that our relationship has changed. Catherine nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. I've been thinking about it a lot, too. I made a huge mistake. And I'm so sorry. But I don't know if we can fix it." Josh, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Michael, I want to be honest. I never meant for things to get this far. I care about Catherine, but I also realize that what happened was wrong. I'm willing to step back and give you both space to figure things out." I appreciated his honesty, though it did little to ease the pain. "I think that's a good idea," I said. "I need time to process everything and decide what I want." The conversation was heavy with the weight of our collective failure. As we drove the last stretch home, the once promising future now seemed uncertain and fraught with challenges. The decisions we faced would be difficult, and the road ahead was shrouded in ambiguity. In the weeks that followed, the reality of our situation began to settle in. Catherine and I made the difficult decision to separate temporarily. The emotional scars from the betrayal needed time to heal, and we both understood that some distance was necessary to figure out our next steps. Catherine moved into a small apartment in the city while I stayed in the house we had shared. The physical separation did little to ease the emotional strain, but it provided us with a much-needed space to reflect on what had happened. During this period, I tried to focus on myself, seeking therapy to help process the pain and gain perspective on my own feelings. The sessions were a mix of introspection and frustration, but they provided a way to work through the anger and sadness that had consumed me. Catherine also sought counseling, both to address her own emotions and to understand the underlying issues that had led to the affair. We exchanged occasional messages, mostly about logistical matters, but there was a palpable distance in our interactions. One evening, as I was sorting through some old photos, I found a picture of Catherine and me from happier times. The image was a stark reminder of what we had once had, and the realization of how far we had drifted left me with a deep sense of regret. I decided it was time to have one final conversation with Catherine. We agreed to meet at a local park, a neutral location that provided a sense of calm. As we sat on a bench, the weight of the past few months seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a sense of tentative hope. "Catherine," I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion, "I've been thinking a lot about us and what we've been through. I know we've both made mistakes, and we're both hurting. But I also think that we need to decide what we want moving forward. Catherine looked at me with a mixture of sadness and determination. I agree. I've been doing a lot of thinking, too. I know that I made a terrible mistake, and I want to find a way to make things right. But I also understand if you need to move on. The conversation was bittersweet, filled with both closure and uncertainty. We discussed the possibility of reconciliation, but it was clear that both of us needed time to heal and reflect on our own. As we parted ways, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The journey we had been on was far from over, but it had reached a crucial turning point. The future was uncertain, but the path ahead was now clearer. We both knew that the road to healing and moving on would be long and challenging, but it was a journey we had to face separately. In the end, the experience had changed us both profoundly. The pain of betrayal had given way to a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other. The future was uncertain, but it was filled with the possibility of growth and renewal.